Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the series where I teach you how to play Magic the Gathering. The last time I went over basic deck setup, turn phases, and touched on combat. While I was very satisfied with the lesson, there are a couple of things I did not explain well. The first thing is generic mana. Generic mana is usually represented as a small circle with a number in the middle. This means that it requires any of the 5 mana colors to fulfill the colorless mana that is needed to cast it. This basically means you don't need a specific color like red, blue, or green to cast a colorless spell like an artifact. Any one of the 5 works in completing the casting of the spell. I also did not explain a couple rules on building your deck well. We had touched on non-basic lands a little. With non-basic lands, you can only have one of each per deck. This means that I can put Sapseep Forest and Fort Grashed in my deck, but I can't have multiple copies of those. Don't forget, you can have as many basic lands in your deck as you want. I had also forgotten to mention about choosing your commander for your deck. You have to make sure your commander is a creature and a legendary creature. The mana base, which are what type of lands or colors you put in your deck, have to be exactly what colors are needed to cast the commander. Additionally, if your commander has an ability that requires another color to activate, you have to include that in your mana base as well. If Wilhelt had an ability that gives all zombie creatures I control +1/+0, and it requires 1 red mana to activate, I get to have red mana and red spells in my commander deck. One last thing I forgot to touch up on more is commander damage. If a player takes 21 damage or more from another player's commander, they lose the game. However, the commander that deals damage to the player must be specifically attacking that player. For example, if I control Niv-Mizzet as my commander, and if I draw a card, I can deal 1 damage to any target. If I choose my opponent to take the 1 damage, it is only normal damage, not commander damage. If I declare Niv-Mizzet as my attacker, then the damage this card does counts as commander damage. Now that we have gotten all of the small stuff out of the way, let's start on Lesson 2. Today we will be going more in depth with creatures and certain effects that can happen when they are summoned, what enchantments are and how to play them, and a more detailed look at combat phases. Today, I have the current U.S. President, Joe Biden, helping with Lesson 2. Say hi, Joe.
Hi. Hello, Americans. What are we doing today?
Man, if only I could forget things as easy as this goofball. Anyway, what deck are you running today, Joe?
The one and only deck that I feel at home with, my little troopers. These guys can get things done.
That's cool. I'm running a deck that I had played a while back. It specializes in casting massive creatures that come with ETB effects.
That's right. What was ETB again?
I will get to that in a little bit. One more thing I had forgotten to mention. When a Magic the Gathering game starts, you start with 7 cards in your hand. Why don't you start us off, Joe, and go first?
I will play a forest and pass turn.
I will draw for turn and play a Firelit Thicket. Here's an interesting non-basic land to look at. I can tap it for 1 generic mana, or I can pay either red or green to get different combinations of green and red. I can't really do much else with this, so I will pass turn.
I will draw for turn, play a swamp, and tap 2 to play Golgari Signet. I can pay 1 colorless mana and tap it to add swamp and forest to my mana pool. I will pass turn.
I will draw for turn, play a mountain, and pass turn.
I will draw for turn and tap my swamp to tap my Golgari Signet. I will use the floating green mana and tap my forest to play Sylvan Anthem.
That's a perfect enchantment to start us off, Joe. Go on ahead and read what it says.
Aye, aye, Captain. Green creatures I control get +1/+1, and whenever a green creature enters the battlefield under my control, I get to scry 1.
So Joe's enchantment stays on the battlefield until a card or effect causes it to be removed. It gives his green creatures +1/+1. You can identify what color a creature is by simply looking at its mana cost or how the card is described. He also gets to scry 1 whenever a green creature ETBs under his control. ETB enters the battlefield.
I thought it was Elite Trainer Box.
When you scry, you look at the top card of your library and choose between keeping it at the top or moving it to the bottom. If you have a condition where you scry 3 times, you look at the top 3 cards and choose what goes to the bottom or stays on top in the order they were revealed. If you have a card that tells you to scry 1, and afterwards you scry 1 again, you look at the top card again, unless you moved it to the bottom of your library from the first time. You can continue now, Joe.
That's all. I will pass turn.
I will draw for turn, play a forest, and tap 3 to play Worn Power Stone. It enters in tapped, but once it is untapped, I can use it to add 2 generic mana to my mana pool. I will pass it over to Joe.
I will draw for turn, play a swamp, and tap 3 to summon Champion of Lambholt. I get to scry 1. I like it. I will keep the card on top of my library. Creatures with power less than this card's power can't block creatures I control. And whenever another creature enters the battlefield I control, put a 1/1 counter on this card.
Great play, Joe. Now we have a green creature getting +1/+1 from your enchantment, and it has a very powerful condition with your other creatures. For those who don't know, a 1/1 counter is a permanent upgrade for your creature, unless it is removed from the battlefield. If Joe summons his commander next turn, Champion will get a 1/1 counter, getting it from a 2/2 to a 3/3. The only difference is, if his enchantment leaves the battlefield, Champion remains at 2/2 because of the 1/1 counter.
I will pass turn.
I will draw for turn, play a forest, and tap 4 to summon my commander. I can tap my commander to add 4 generic mana to my mana pool, and I can only use that mana to cast spells containing X. I will pass it over to Joe and show what this means on my turn.
I will draw for turn, play a swamp, and summon my commander. I get to scry 1. I will put that bad boy at the bottom. Champion gets a 1/1 counter. My epic trooper has forest walking, meaning it can't be blocked if the opponent I am attacking controls a forest.
Indeed, I control a forest.
If one or more tokens would be created under my control, I create those tokens, plus that many 1/1 green squirrel creature tokens instead. I can also pay 1 black mana to sacrifice as many of my troopers as I want and give a target creature +X/X until end of turn. I will pass turn.
I will draw for turn, play a mountain, and tap 11 to play Feral Hydra. This card enters the battlefield with X/1/1 counters on it. In this case, X is 10. Any player can pay 3 mana to put a 1/1 counter on this creature.
Wait a minute, well, why in the country thing would your opponents put 1/1 counters on a creature you have? Wouldn't that help you?
Well, a couple things, Joe. One, in case it wasn't clear to the viewers, this is an activated ability. Typically, any Magic card can have an activated ability, except for instants and sorceries, more on those in the next episode. And these require some sort of cost to activate. So in this case, any player can pay 3 mana to put a 1/1 counter on this creature. 2, it's probably for 3 to 4 player games, so your other opponents can play a more political side of the game and get you to attack their enemies with a stronger creature.
I can't remember why I asked, but that's pretty cool, Baraki.
Thanks, Joe. I will pass turn.
I will draw for turn, play a forest, and tap 4 to play Liege of the Hollows. I scry that nasty one. The card stays on top. Champion triggers, and if Liege of the Hollows is put into any graveyard from play, each player may pay any amount of mana to put that number of squirrel tokens into play under their control. Treat those tokens as 1/1 green creatures. I will pass turn.
Now we get to explore some more of the combat phase this turn. I will draw for turn, play a mountain, and tap 5 to summon Xenagos, God of Revels. There are a ton of keywords here to understand, so pay close attention, please. Xenagos has indestructible. This means that any damage this creature takes, it can't die. There are conditions where you can get it to go in the graveyard if its toughness reaches 0. But that's a bit more complicated, so let's just stick with it not being able to die. As long as my devotion to red and green is less than 7, this card isn't a creature. Your devotion to a color is determined by an amount of spells you have casted have that color in their mana cost. For example, I have Feral Hydra with 1 forest mana on the card. If I needed to find out what my devotion to green is, it would be 1 because of Feral Hydra. The important part here is my devotion to red and green is less than 7, therefore making Xenagos not a creature. At the beginning of combat on my turn, another target creature I control gets +X/X until end of turn, where X is that creature's power. Real quick, this right here is a triggered ability, where a certain part of the game needs to happen for the ability to activate. In this case, the start of combat triggers this ability. All right, Joe, I will go to combat. Use Xenagos' ability to double the power of my creature and attack you with my Feral Hydra, which is a 20/20.
Well, dang, Obama. I will block it with my Champion of Lamholt.
When Joe goes to block this creature, he gets to block all 20 of this damage with 1 creature. At first, this might be surprising to newer players since it's so powerful. But if I managed to give it trample, I could deal excess damage based off of how much Champion was able to block the initial damage.
Well, Baraki, I'm getting sleepy, so could we call it a day and end it here?
That is fine, Joe. I felt like I covered about all I wanted to today anyway. Let's recap what we went over. We covered creature effects and even went into abilities since it came up at a good time. We looked at enchantments and some pretty awesome ways on how they interact with the game and gave a little more insight on combat and how blocking in certain conditions could work. I know we covered a bit more confusing topics this time around, so if there is anything I missed out on, please comment down below, or if one of the veteran players is watching, it would be greatly appreciated if you can help clarify some problems I might have glossed over on accident. Anyway, before we end it off, do you have anything to say, Joe? That flipping goober. Anyway, in the next lesson, I will be going over instants and sorceries with Ben Shapiro. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next lesson.